Balki, welcome to the Commerce Talks podcast in the morning here at the Shop Talks conference in London. We're going to talk about the grocery retail business. You, as one of the biggest manufacturers in that area, will tell us how you look at the different omni-channel and multi-channel trends in that area. Please introduce yourself and Mars a bit so the listeners can understand what you're working on.
Sure, and thank you very much for this opportunity. Lovely to speak to you. So I'm Balki. I'm based in London. I lead a group that's called Digital Demand for Mars. Digital Demand essentially is responsible for all consumer experience platform capabilities, as well as extending into customer experience, as we now know that that's also important in terms of transformation. So I lead experience platforms which are focused on digital content, digital commerce, and digital marketing. And my role is global, and I work with all the key food segments of Mars, which basically means confectionery, pet food, as well as human food. And my role essentially is to support the transformation, to make sure that the capabilities that we have in Mars from a technology perspective are addressing the business imperatives of today from digitization.
And if we're looking at the bigger picture, so I understand Mars is a corporation with roughly 40 billion revenue. You're the inventor of the Milky Way, Snickers, and a lot of more interesting products, M&Ms, I guess. So this is a product range where, like 10 years ago at a similar conference, this was traded 99% wholesale base. So you would ship like big pallets, big boxes to the retailers, like an Aldi, like an Rewe, like an Ocado, though they sell it. Has this changed, or has the strategy changed over the last 10 years? Because there was a lot of chat about direct-to-consumer initiatives in the market.
Yeah, so let me give you a breakdown of how Mars is organized, and then I'll come into why it is important that we transform from the wholesale angle. So Mars essentially is 4 parts. It's a $40+ billion organization. It's privately held. Confectionery is a big part of it. So that's where you would have heard M&Ms, Mars bars, Snickers, Twix, Milky Way, etc. The second big part is pet care, and pet care is really pet food, veterinary services, as well as diagnostics. And there's also a group there that looks at new innovations, hardware, IoT devices, etc. The third group is human food. So you would have heard Ben's Original, Dolmio, etc. So those are human food. And the last one is called Mars Edge, which focuses on innovation, new products, what is out there that we can do. From a digitization perspective and from a D2C perspective, it's quite important because if you look at the pet care space itself, the advent of new players, new startups, the Gen Z requiring new capabilities, or the way they access the products, or their whole focus on topics like brand purpose, sustainability. These are capabilities that we need to typically access by getting closer to them and directly. So that is the whole concept of why direct-to-consumer becomes more important from a pet care perspective. From a confectionery perspective, it's also about competing with the new capabilities which are there in terms of personalization, in terms of new propositions and products. So how do we get to consumers directly? So while wholesale has been the core premise from a Mars perspective in terms of stocking in the Walmarts and Krogers, it's quite important that we bring the capabilities of Mars as an ecosystem to the pet parent from a pet care perspective, which means vet care, insurance, diagnostics, as well as food, in the way that the consumers want to consume it today, in the way that they relate to the brand. So hence, moving away from wholesale is not the goal, but how do we create a halo effect? How do we offset the percentage loss that we incur on a year-to-year basis, and how do we make it up through digital channels, and digitization is the goal.
Yeah. If we are following the conversations here on the shop talk in the grocery tracks, where very big grocery retailers tell about their story, their vision, their strategy, we are hearing more and more that they depend on exclusive product strategies. So they try to develop their own Snickers, so to say, their own M&Ms, and try to sell it to the customer through their brick and mortar channels and their online on their online channel. So by definition, you have to find like other ways to reach the customer. you're now owning some of the signature brands, so you have to present Milky Way and Snickers in the store. Otherwise, people will leave. It's same. You have to present like Coca-Cola or Pepsi in the store. Otherwise, people will leave. But how has the conversation changed with those retailers over the year, regardless if it's pet or human food?
Yeah, so like I said, the focus on grocery, on wholesale will continue to remain. That is the bread and butter. That is the biggest channel. So there, in terms of innovation, it really is about what are the new flavors you could introduce, what are the new bundles you could introduce, how could you create more seasonality. So that innovation on that product front continues. But when it comes to digitization and creating our own propositions, which is meaningful on the direct-to-consumer channels, there are a lot of opportunities. And those are addressing the themes of today. So, for example, aspects around sustainability, organic, regenerative. So how do we create products which address those categories, which then become propositions which are appealing to the consumers, and we sell them by creating our own products or packaging products in different bundles, in different capabilities, in different subscriptions and personalization for existing products, which then become appealing. So those are the different tracks that we're trying to solve.
And when it comes to direct consumer, are there any experiments that are live already? Yesterday we had here Julie Mathers, who founded Flora and Fauna in Australia, which is a leading vegan beauty retailing brand. Obviously products you would also get like in the retail channels, but she was able to build like a value proposition where customers said, okay, I'd like rather buy with Flora and Fauna because I trust them more. Are there similar initiatives from a Mars perspective?
Yes, there are several initiatives, especially on the pet care side, where we are, figuring out what is that right mix, what is that right proposition which will click. And there are basically about 3 or 4 pillars there. So the first is around just the quality of food. How is it produced? How is it organic? How is it, let's say, based on insect protein or those that appeal to the consumers? The second is really customization. How do we create pet food that is relevant to the stage of the pet, to the diseases that the pet has, or to the extra care that the pet needs to, go through. The third is really convenience. So how could we create, for example, appealing subscription models, which becomes quite easy for subscription. The fourth is around sustainability. So one of the propositions is around the whole cat litter service. So how could you create an organic way of collecting back cat litter such that it becomes appealing? So there are different propositions which are live in different stages to experiment this. For example, Perfect Fit in Germany is a launch that we did recently, which is about custom food, which is based on a questionnaire about the pet stage in life, pet conditions, and then customized to that particular pet. How do we sell? If you look at Pretty Litter, which is a recent acquisition that we made. So D2C is about both organic as well as inorganic. So what are those propositions in terms of appeal? So Pretty Litter is an amazing product that can one, in terms of how it is produced, and second, how you could look at the poop of your pet to determine if it has conditions. The third one which has been launched here is Natusan, which is around a litter product, which is essentially a subscription service to address the landfill problem. Litter from a pet waste is one of the biggest problems in a sustainability angle. So how do we collect the litter back so that it can be decomposed in a sustainable manner? So these are different experiments which are happening across propositions. So it's not just about packaging existing products and selling online or creating bundles, but it's about addressing questions which are important to our consumers.
Let's stay with a Perfect Fit, I think was the name example. So you're coming out of a wholesale organization setup. So and obviously for wholesale organization, it's usually hard to think about direct to consumer. So how is this project shaped? Because I think other retailers, other manufacturers can learn from it how to do it. What have you learned with it's an internal initiative, so it's not an acquisition. I understand correctly.
That's correct.
So how is it looking like? Is it like a new team? Was there a team with from the existing pet food pillar of the business doing the same stuff? Have you acquired a team doing this for you?
Yes. So first it starts with the vision from the business and the backing of the executives to say that this is the direction we need to take, and that's a massive step. So a huge credit to the to the business segments who are thinking about it and backing it to say we will invest in this. This is the future. By 2025, 2026, this part of the business in terms of direct to consumer or specific propositions, will be a huge part of our business. So that's one, recognizing and backing that. The second is then creating the structural organization that can really help with. And that really is about what is the base technology capabilities that you need, and then what are the base operational capabilities that we need, which is different from how to address wholesale, which basically means how does consumer care work? How does supply chain work? How will pick, pack, and shipping work in terms of eaches? Do we need to set up our own warehouse, or do we need to create a space in the warehouse, or do we need to outsource? So each of these decisions are being made in a strategic way such that it can address the future vision as well. And all this is, internally done. The third is leadership, which is how do we get the core leadership from experiences that they've already had, right? Which can really drive this business and equip and educate existing folks in the business also to be on a fast track. The fourth really is about the whole setup and how the team works with each other. How do you create, for example, an entity which is specifically focused on D2C? How do you create an entity? For example, we have opened an entity in Amsterdam which is focused on direct to consumer, so that all the teams from the various functions sit together towards that vision. So that's one. On the manufacturing side as well, it's a huge learning curve in terms of how do you re-equip a small piece of the manufacturing line to be able to do custom packing, to be able to mix and match based on the orders that you're getting. So it's a learning process from top to bottom, which is supported by the vision and backing, with sourcing the right capabilities as a core team, by selecting technologies and partners who have been on this journey, and then creating co-located teams so that you give the runway and the bandwidth over a period of time to make it successful. It's not going to be magic. It's a multi-year journey, but the backing and the the environment is being created.
And are you in it for the multi-year investment? Because I would guess like this is the tailored pet food business. That's a business to make a payback or to turn it into like a profitable path. It could take years. Like you have the learning curve now. Obviously, you have to invest in acquiring customers. Then maybe the first cohorts are the wrong cohorts, not spending enough, not loyal enough. Like some challenges with the product itself. So how is it set up? So do you have like a KPI where you say, okay, if you're not reaching the 1 million, 10 million revenue milestone in year 2, we have to end this project and investing into other projects?
Yes. So there is a clear framework that has been put in place to evaluate the stages that a proposition goes through. So there are about 5 or 6 stages which have been defined, and they are clear checkpoints to understand if a proposition is meeting those parameters or not. And also the mindset of taking the decision to kill propositions is also very clearly laid out to say that if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But what we have achieved though is learned a lot from it. We would have learned from a process perspective, we would have learned from what works, we would have learned from consumer feedback, we would have learned from an organizational agility standpoint, which should feed into the next proposition that we do. So even if we fail, we take the learnings, and there are clear stages to go through from that perspective. And also from a KPIs, it's not just about revenue, it's also about the data that we collect, the information that we know and understand our pet parents more closely, which can then help us build future propositions with what we have learned from that data in mind. And it also helps us with a lot of our media efficiency. The more the data we collect, the more we are able to optimize our advertising spend in other channels. The more we are able to merge channels from a brand website, social, as well as D2C, to make it more efficient and bring in more synergies. The clear vision is try out multiple propositions which are focused on multiple pillars, whether it be sustainability or personalization or custom mixing or long tail, that are addressing consumer problems. Be able to launch many of these propositions in a cost-effective manner in a quick time so that we are able to learn, and then scale the propositions that make sense, right? And kill the others that don't.
Okay, Mars is like from a startup perspective the perfect exit goal. To be honest, so there have been many pet food startups around in Europe even on a global level. Many human food products have been around. Some were in the Commerce Talks podcast, some in the sister podcast Kassenzone. And when I was talking about with the founders about like potential long-term strategies, exit paths, obviously, so one goal could be to sell to a huge manufacturer like Mars or to a huge grocery chain, so they can help scaling it. So you must have seen many of those startups in the last years that were able to build successful trajectories in their area. Were there many compelling offers among them where you say, okay, that makes sense, that is something we cannot build ourselves fast enough, let's buy startup XYZ?
Yes. So there's absolutely a group that is intent on figuring out what are those propositions which would automatically be a big synergy from a D2C perspective. And I think our goals are also clear. It's not about organically growing to the targets that we have, but be a mix of organic and inorganic. From a scouting perspective of what makes sense for those propositions, there's an active team that pretty much is on a daily basis out there looking for propositions, and we have made acquisitions as well in the recent past. And those acquisitions give us probably 3 or 4 key benefits. One of them is potentially manufacturing, the way they have set up their units, the way the personalization works, the way the custom mix works. It's potentially extensible from a know-how perspective or a machinery perspective to other propositions that we may already have. The second is simply a space that we don't need to invest more time or costs to create. The third could be just capabilities and skills of somebody having set up a startup and run it, and what we can learn instantly to be able to infuse into the existing business. So I think the fourth is just connectivity, the ecosystem. I truly believe that from a Mars pet care perspective, the breadth of services covers pretty much the entire pet care journey, right from somebody trying to acquire a pet to learn more about how to bringing up pets, to all life stages, to insurance, to vets, to diagnostics, to breeders, to vets. It's everything. So how can any startup you look at would automatically fit into one of those ecosystem journeys. So I think there is a tremendous potential when you look at it that way.
Looking at the pet industry during Corona, I've learned in the German-speaking market that there was a huge boom. So during Corona, many people started to buy pets, dogs, cats, whatever. So it feels like the amount of dogs and cats now in Germany doubled just in like 2 years, which must have a very, very positive impact on your business. Can you share of the numbers of the growth rate in the industry, not only for Mars, but what you've seen even on a global level? Was it kind of a European pet run, or was it kind of a global effect we've seen?
No, I think it was a global effect. And I think there were a couple of reasons for that. One, obviously, definitely pet acquisition increased big time, globally, as a result of, people being single or people needing company or, whatever. I think the second also was, as a result of the pandemic, there was a fear of being able to stock up and, have availability. So that also pushed up the sales significantly. So, absolutely from what the pet division itself achieved was significant. However, there were some spots which also suffered. So, for example, hospital footfall or diagnostics footfall, obviously came down during that period of time, for at least a few months, and then picked up. But I think the beauty of a diversified pet care business is there are some businesses that will do amazingly well and then compensate for the others which are going through the tough times.
And you said it's not only a European effect, a global effect, but I just overstated the numbers, like doubling like the amount of pets available in the market. But what were the numbers? Like plus 20% pet owners in a specific market, plus 30, plus 5. So how big are the numbers actually?
I don't recollect the exact numbers, but it is quite significant that it very easily exceeded the targets that our businesses had, for that particular year, which I think says a lot.
Okay. In the pet industry, we see, especially on the European level, we see some strong retailers with brick and mortar DNA. Fressnapf, for example, Futterhaus. We see some online retailers like Zooplus. Many of them do have a hard time to create a profitable e-commerce business. So it's still like the time of pets.com, like one of the biggest fails in the .com crash. So there's plenty of room of innovation. Still, people are not willing to pay a high price for the logistics when they're ordering 20 kilogram dog food, for example. Do you see on a global level innovations in that direction where you see, okay, there are some startups, some businesses that do have a much smarter approach on this pet care, supply, e-commerce business?
I think the general rule for all D2C business is very similar to what you said, right? That it's a long path. The costs are high. It takes time to be profitable. But what we have seen through some of the acquisitions that we have made is those who are focusing on subscription businesses and those who are focusing on a very narrow niche which they are able to target are the more successful ones. They are able to build that with a smaller team, with a smaller cost. They are able to really address a key problem, that a particular pet parent is facing, and they are able to stand up that solution fast. So for example, if you see some of the D2C solutions, if there is a massive amount of work to be done behind the scene, right, which is source the products, it needs to be organic, you have to build a recipe, then you have to ship it, then there are costs to make sure that the food is preserved and packaging, all those add up. So I think those businesses, and there are definitely those out there which are focusing on a very narrow niche, and which as a result of that are not required to be that cost intensive, and then as a result of their subscription model and repeat ordering are able to be profitable much faster.
Mm. And have you seen like outstanding startups in the last like 1 or 2 years that really convinced you, okay, that's the way to go? Because when I'm covering the pet food retailers now for a couple of years, and the innovation level is still low. So the ones that are turning a profit do grow very, very slow, and the profit is not super interesting. We're still talking about like 1% EBITDA margins, and on a very, very huge business with one or two bad decision, that's too low actually to cover for the bad decisions. Have you seen? And then we have seen Chewy, the US case. All the European retailers looked at it and say, okay, they do a much better job in selling the story to the stock owners, and now the stock came down also like 70%, 80%. Though it kind of all the innovation impulse kind of left the market. We are back at square zero, more or less. So it back at like brick and mortar, boring retail. People are going to the store with their car, packing their 20 kilogram dog food or whatever in the car. So it seems to be a very hard problem to solve. Can you convince me otherwise?
I don't think it's an easy problem to solve. First of all, the main premise of being in this space is, I would say, threefold. One is to absorb the decline in the normal category and the normal channel of business that you would anyway see, right? Because of multiple startups, splintering sales across different capabilities and different propositions out there, right? So that is number one. The second thing is acquisition of data and what we can do with it for other channels, and use it properly, absorb it on better capabilities on media efficiency, etc. And the third is, how do we take those learnings and embed it as a new capability or proposition in the larger ecosystem that Mars Pet Care has? To me, these are the three things. It is not solely about profit, because if profit were the only target, I think it would be quite tough. It is about patience to see how one or two or three propositions really kick off. And it is about acquisition to balance what profitability we may not have with our native capabilities, and how we offset it with acquisitions. But again, address those three things, which are key, which is absorb the reduction in normal categories, learn from data, and then use those learnings to create new propositions in our larger ecosystem. So that to me is a blend, right? If we only target profitability, then yes, and that is what most startups do. I think the power of Mars as a startup with muscle as a result of its ecosystem is massive. So hence, I would say comparison with a standalone startup may be a bit skewed in that way. If I combine it with all the three capabilities that we are trying to do, go for.
Okay, let's stick with this statement for just a minute. If you could choose, what is the hardest thing to do? Finding a good idea, like a new value proposition, B, scaling this idea within your Mars ecosystem, or 3, convincing enough people within the Mars ecosystem to get it pulled off, to promote it, because most of them are usually anti-innovation because they're in the wholesale business. That's part of their job. They are risk managers. They usually, if there's something new where you cannot say what's going to be the outcome in 5 years, they have to say no, sorry, that's too risky. Out of these 3 challenges, what is the easiest to solve from your point of view?
Easiest to solve.
Yeah.
I think scaling is the easiest to solve if the idea clicks, in my view, in terms of the capabilities that Mars has, right? From every function perspective, there are people, who are available and dedicated to be able to pull it off. I think the toughest parts really are, what is that idea, right? That would really pull consumers and help in acquiring consumers in a cost-effective manner, because pretty much there is competition for every idea out there, right? So what is that idea which will be quite convincing, quite cost-effective to implement? And then I think from a scaling perspective, I don't think that's a big challenge.
And on how many ideas do you have to look at on a weekly basis, internal or external ideas that where people say, please look at it, give me feedback. Is it scalable? Should we start our M&A process here?
There are, from a personal standpoint, I'm not, in all those sessions where ideas are discussed. I think there are quite senior execs who are involved at various levels to go through ideas, go through acquisition, prospects, to discuss across segments on ecosystem values, etc. But I would assume that it's a huge ambition, and it's a key strategy for pet care to really do well in this space, such that we are able to position ourselves in the next 4-5 years as a leading player in this space, be able to learn with the data that we have, and really try to create a proper ecosystem from the pet care perspective.
How many people in the Mars ecosystem will work end of this year on this new ideas, scaling them, introducing them to the market, trying to bring them to the customer?
I would say at least 200, 250 people would be
globally.
Globally, yeah, would be working on this.
That's quite a huge startup on its own already.
It definitely is, and I think the best part is a lot of these folks are also contributing to existing businesses, right? So when they join the process, it's not that they're exclusive. So there is some time till it scales up, and then they become fully contributing to the cause. So that also is a benefit of being a multifunctional organization.
And then maybe one last question, because it's pretty much what the market is like is showing right now. We're seeing a lot of hiring stops, some layoffs at the big tech companies, which is obviously a big issue for newer tech companies, but it might solve, and that's my theory, an issue for the corporates like you, or even smaller corporates that had big problems of hiring talent in the last years, because talent usually was getting into the new tech companies, the bigger ones, or new startup with lots of money, high salaries, ESOPs all this time. That should solve your talent problem from my point of view. Do you see that already?
I have 2-3 views on that, right? One is, and I think this was yesterday mentioned in one of the keynotes as well, which I completely agree, is the culture of the company is, quite important as well. So while yes, there may be talent available, I think the question is how do they really fit into a corporate kind of setup, right? Which is not going to be like a startup kind of setup, right? So those folks who are adaptable, who can relate to it, are quite key, right? Just skills, will not really help. I think the second thing is, from a mass perspective, we are always on a bimodal strategy, right? We are not trying to set up an army of people trying to do, full D2C in-house. We have a core team with core skills to balance our costs and budgets, and then rely on capable partners, to be able to do that. So to me, I think these two are to be balanced. The way I look at it is, if Mars is intent on going after talent and hiring them, I haven't really seen a challenge in the number of people applying for it. For example, we have people from Amazon and Uber and Apple. They have joined us when the intent is there and when the opening is there. So I would balance both of them, right? It is not that we have struggled from a talent perspective to fill capabilities or fill slots, but I'm sure the recent downturn will definitely help. But keeping these two things in mind, which is culture and a balance of our core team versus being able to get tasks done in a cost-effective manner with our partners as well.
Very smart and balanced answer here. Balki, thank you for your time. I'm pretty sure we're going to follow up next year at the Shop Talks, and I guess there's way more than 250 people who work on the direct consumer.
I hope so.
Businesses. Thank you for coming here to our booth.
Yeah, thank you. Pleasure.